Okay, so I think I'm just going to put this back if I can to the beginning. In this short session, I'm going to speak for about 20 minutes, so think of some good questions for the next 10 minutes. But what I want to do is to explain to you a little bit about how we work with people putting together the business case for, I'd say, improving their supply chain, so for implementing software and other changes. I'm going to start by talking about the fact that the policies and structure of many supply chains bake in poor performance. I think really, if you listen to Dave Schultz earlier on, he talked about the fact that Amazon, back in 2014, explained the reason for its success is that it ships in anticipation of demand. And basically, all supply chain professionals really should be doing the same thing. If you wait until the demand crystallizes, it's always going to be too late. So we'll talk a little bit about that, about why there's such poor performance. We'll talk about the fact that lead time and availability are now competitively differentiating. The companies that buy from you and individuals that are looking to source, they're familiar with Amazon's immediate availability, and you need to be able to match that if you want to be able to work against your competitors. We'll look at how you build and how you realize that supply chain business case. And we heard a little bit earlier on about the behavioral factors here. So how do you motivate people to go along with this change? What's in it for them? Why will they do it? And finally, we'll look at questions and answers. So every single thing that really comes to us, every manufactured item, it comes through a distribution channel. Very few of them come directly from the supplier. And even the suppliers themselves have a distribution channel. Why? Because it takes time. There's latency in making stuff. There's latency in shipping it. So almost everybody has some kind of a network like this, some distribution centers, some warehouses, something of this nature, sometimes multiple different echelons or layers of this. And one of the challenges is that over the years, we built up inventory in each of these locations, not necessarily the right inventory. So one of my clients said to me some years ago, and it really stuck in my mind, he said, half of the inventory in the world is safety stock. Half of that is the wrong safety stock, and half of it's in the wrong place. So the key really to supply chain is understanding this. Yeah, getting some visibility of it, but revisiting all those parameters that drive it. So what drives safety stock? Again, Dave stole my thunder a bit. He talked about the fact that it depends on lead time. Well, lead time changes all the time. It's variable. It depends on demand during lead time. And demand itself, we know, it's highly variable, particularly these days, that sometimes things are suddenly in demand and then suddenly not. So all that kind of thing needs to be thought about. One of our clients, incidentally, did a kind of analysis of this. You've heard, I'm sure, about the semiconductor shortage. There are no semiconductors. Actually, semiconductors reach you through a very complex distribution channel. One of the things they did was to analyze what was stuck in the channel and found actually there were plenty of semiconductors. They just weren't visible or available to them. So the thing to do is to think that, yeah, your order policies, I talked about it, so what you know about safety stock and reorder level, which are based on assumptions about the lead time to reorder and based on assumptions about demand, you need to revisit those. One of the key things we found when people put together their case is that they look at things like the pattern of changing inventory turnover at the top and bottom of their business cycle. So we look at this, and this is one that we did, it's just an example, you can see it on our website, that shows how agile the supply chain is, how responsive it is to change. So we plotted this over some years, and we used public data to do this. So you can download this tool if you want to. It's just a spreadsheet. It has some data in there. In this case, it's for consumer goods companies. And you can plot and see, where am I? Where's my margin relative to my inventory turnover? Where's my inventory turnover relative to my change in sales? Normally, as you can imagine, when you reach the bottom of your business cycle, when things are slowing down, you tend to have more inventory on your hands. It's turning slowly. The CFO is probably getting upset and going, we need to do something about this, maybe mark it down. If you mark it down, then your margin's going to fall. And likewise, you can say, I'm going to ship everything direct from the supplier, wherever the customer is. Yeah, that's going to cost you, so it's going to impact your margin. A really good supply chain strategy will say, we trunk stuff to a distribution center. We model a demand there, and then we do our last mile from there. We don't do the last mile from the supplier. So I would say that these kind of tools, very simple ratio analysis like this, is a great way of showing what your competitive position is relative to your peers. They might be competitors, there might be other companies doing something similar to you. But the point is, that's really useful in starting off your business case. The other thing I talked about is that lead time and availability are really very important in terms of your competitive position relative to your peers. So we did a study just at the end of 2020. Not too surprisingly, you can see, in this case, it's in the B2B world, that B2B customers really valued suppliers who helped them to anticipate and respond to changes in demand. At the same time, I was working with some pharmaceutical manufacturers, or I'd say probably healthcare manufacturers. One of the things they said to us is that their ability to even be licensed to be in the market, so the GXP compliance, would depend on their ability to prove that they could have continuity of supply. And you can imagine, if you're licensing a treatment or a drug, you want to be sure that there's continuity of supply. So the supply chain there are competitive, but maybe also a factor in even being in the business. We also work with a global pharmaceutical company. They applied some AI. We heard a little bit earlier on about ML and AI. There's a ton of data out there to which you can apply these new techniques. The main thing they did, by the way, was to look at all those order policies and change those. And notice what they did. Yes, they managed to reduce their supply chain costs because they didn't have so much of that wrong inventory in the wrong place. But most importantly for them, they increased the shelf life of the pharmaceuticals that they were distributing because they were fresh when they got there. So all these kind of things can be elements of your supply chain business case. So how do you build it? Well, you normally need to have something which helps people to understand what's the problem, that why of the project. And it might be just some simple ratios like that and comparing them with your peers. You need to have something which describes, in concept anyway, what's the solution. So at the moment, people tend to go, is visibility? Well, no, not really. It's going to be something else as well. If it was visibility, that might be okay if people could take all the decisions. But we heard earlier on talking about the amount of data. Can they do that? No, you probably need something else as well. So you need to describe the elements of the concept in the solution. You probably need to say what other options there were and why did you reject them. And then you need a timeline, you need something about risk. One of those risks, of course, is adoption. Another risk might be, some kind of unknown event. If there's an unknown event, we need to build some kind of buffer in there. Might be some buffer inventory, might be buffer capacity. Again, we need that to be part of our business case. And finally, we need to have some goals and some metrics. We saw some of the types of things that people think about, and they're often about reducing lead time so we can win more business, so we can be more attractive. Might be about increasing our inventory turnover, so using the same inventory to support a better level of service. And that's really where we come to the financial analysis. So when we do this, we always think about, yes, the costs. So, what might it cost us to do this? And generally speaking, those are, perhaps I'm going out on a limb here, those are they're not uncertain. They're quite easy to work out. I know we've all been on projects which overran. But it's not as hard as the benefits. The benefits or the impact on the business, they often feel conjectural. And it's why I'll show you a little bit later on. You need to do a lot of work with the stakeholders to get them to buy into those benefits. So will they believe it? Will they just laugh at you when you say, we're going to get more business if we have better lead time? They need to come from you. And the other thing I would say is that there's there's a value in flexibility or options. So one of the things we did here, we started off building in the kind of options pricing model to this, and we found that was a bit, too complicated for people to understand. So now we normally do it with scenarios. So what if demand suddenly peaked, another 25%? How would we handle that, and what would that mean? What if demand tanked? What if we couldn't get anything from China? All that kind of stuff. So we normally build in some scenarios into that, and that's our kind of flexibility. So what do we do? The first thing we do is we think about the technology or the applications. So the ones which have most potential, and I'll show a slide in a minute that shows you how you can go about thinking about that. Step 2, you do these user interviews. Why? Part of it is psychological. It's bringing them into the business case. It's not your business case, it's their business case, because these were the things that were pains to them. And by the way, just a little bit further down, you can see things like the metrics. We ask them about, how do you get paid? How do you get measured? How do you feel good about yourself? There's always a number. And one of the things that we try and do is to say, how do we build that into the case so that this case matters to you, that number matters to you? And then we create a kind of, we have a big spreadsheet, and again, you can download it if you want, that lets you model the revenue, the cost, and the balance sheet scenarios that there might be. And I'll talk a bit about balance sheet. I've been talking a bit glibly about inventory turnover. What that really means is, part of your working capital is the inventory that you must have to support the business. And the turnover is how quickly do you change that? Remember that the pharmaceutical company had a longer shelf life. Why? Because it didn't have old stuff stuck in the supply chain. It was churning it more quickly. That churn is immensely important to your CFO. They really care a lot about that. So we always have that as one of the elements. Now, I promised I would say something about the actual applications themselves. We conduct surveys of our readers, and we ask them about the relative business value of technologies and their relative maturity. And then we put them into quadrants, because that's what all consultants and analysts do. But one of the things I want you to notice here, just look where they're investing. See that demand signal repository there? How does Amazon know what it's going to put where? How does it know where people want pink ones and yellow ones? Because it does a massive analysis of search engine arguments. And how might you do that in your context? Yeah, you might be looking at Google Analytics, but you might be looking at other stuff as well. You might be looking at the R coefficient of reinfection or something of that nature. Certainly some of our clients used that R coefficient while it was being published, and they used it to swap from one supplier to another. So the thing is to think about, there isn't just a thing called supply chain, there's a bunch of different applications, and each of them has different value and has different level of maturity. So you need to think about that. What kind of benefits? I said, the real trick in this is in the benefits. Cost not so hard. So one of the things that we look at is, well, what extra revenue might you get by having the right inventory in the right place, having anticipated the demand and not tried to get it there afterwards? What else? You might get increased margin, of course, because of that. And then the point down here, what CFOs really love, they love accelerating that inventory turnover. Why? Because you had the inventory in the right place when the demand materialized. Not too early, not too late, and that's what they really care about. So you might have then reduced inventory carrying costs. We saw that in the case of the pharmaceutical company. And not to be sniffed at now, you might have an improved carbon footprint as well, because instead of, let's say, sending single items, you're grouping them together. By the way, tons of people I work with, they take data out of warehouse and transportation management systems, and they calculate that footprint for each delivery. So you might want to be optimizing those deliveries as well. We put this together normally over a 3-year horizon. So we look at, some of the extra sales. This was just a model that we did for somebody who's doing some B2C, some commerce, some in-store B2C. And we modeled out all of these benefits, and you can see over to the right our notes that explained what they were. And then what we do is we calculate a kind of present value against the cost. And what are the costs? The costs normally are some kind of platform costs. In this case, we modeled them based on a variety of platforms that we looked at as 5% of enterprise revenues. And the important thing is that because these supply chain tools, these platforms, they're very heavily connected to lots of other systems. So one of the things that we think about a lot is, what does it cost you to configure them and to integrate them with everything else you've got? And in our case, the surveys that we did showed that we ought to be thinking about twice the first year's license cost. So actually a very significant amount of money, but you need to put it into the calculation. And here you can see we modeled that out. We took the assumed benefits, we took the costs, and we modeled out their present value using a discount rate. And that's the kind of thing that people expect when they see a business case. So they like to see a summary along these lines. And again, this is a spreadsheet that if you want, I put the link there, you can find on our website, and you can use it to your own content. So what do you need to do? You need to think about those key elements of the business case. You need to think about perhaps using our ROI of supply chain online model, and you can go look at it there. And you might also like to look at the tool that lets you benchmark your own progress over time against your peers. So that said, I managed to canter through that very quickly, and now I'd like to ask you if you have any questions and answers, and perhaps if there's any that have come in from the online viewers as well.
Thank you ever so much. It's fascinating. Do we have any questions from the floor? No? We do have some questions actually online from our remote attendees, George. Now the first one is, say who they are, is the rise of omnichannel changing supply chain management?
That's a really good question. And omnichannel has changed it immensely. And it's one of the reasons why we see people thinking about their normal, let's say their normal strategy for putting inventory in a distribution center and sending it to stores. Maybe that doesn't work anymore, because the pattern of online demand might not be the same as the pattern in store. And what you really need to do, well, what we see people doing, is they segment their customers. They segment their customers by their propensity to fulfill online and to fulfill in store. And they use that to drive their allocation of inventory or their anticipatory shipping. Because you might need to send it to the store for them to pick up. Well, you need to do some maths to do that. Or you might have a wider range that you let them fulfill online. So you need to do that plan.
Sure. And I have another one here for you, George. You were talking about a high degree of churn with inventory being viewed as a good thing at board level. Somebody here is asking, is just-in-time inventory management possible anymore?
Oh, that's a great question. And there was a headline on the Wall Street Journal when everything, do you remember when there was all that terrific shortage, particularly in America? There was no rice, no milk powder, and they went, just-in-time has killed supply chain. No, just-in-time actually made stuff cheap for us. But prudent supply chain is about not just in case. We used to call it just in case when I worked in a factory. We had tons of stuff that we didn't need. That was just in case. Not just in case, not just in time, but just right. And just right says we need to do the best we can to anticipate demand. So we're going to use everything we've got. We might use some historical data, might use Google Analytics, might use other indicators, but we might also be taking in some risk indicators. There's a lot of third-party risk tools that you can buy, and that might say to us, wait a minute, there's a possibility of another flu epidemic coming, and here's the data that shows it. We better stockpile here and here and here, or we better have an alternate supplier here and here. So we see a lot of onshore and nearshore supplying as another one of these buffers against uncertainty.
And just one from me here, George, you're talking about nearshoring, reshoring, with China still following its zero tolerance approach to COVID. What impact is that having on supply chains in your experience?
I tell you, with people that I'm working with, that's one of the risks that they take into account. Actually, a ton of stuff has already moved in North America to Mexico. Vietnam has been making hay with this and going, we're an alternate location, particularly for apparel. So, people have to take it into an account as a risk. Now, it's interesting, when you look at automotive, look at what happened in 2020, you had millions and millions of pounds and euros of half-completed automation all over the world. I mean, Fiat, Chrysler, you saw it in Hyundai, everywhere. And what were they waiting for? They were waiting for gaskets. I mean, something which costs nothing. One of the things that we are seeing is people using 3D printing for something like that, going, yeah, why wait? We can just do it here.
Right. I mean, disruptive technologies like 3D printing, otherwise known as additive manufacturing as well, helping to shorten supply chains. What other disruptive technologies are you seeing among your customers that are helping in a similar way?
Yeah, people will, of course they talk about AI and ML, we've talked about that. That's for helping you understand what the variability might be, and also for forecasting that demand. So there's tons of data that you can apply this to. Another thing people talk a lot about is blockchain. So people say, yeah, no, blockchain will definitely, show me the provenance of this and it will make sure this is a genuine part. Yes and no. Blockchain really digitizes an existing system of trust. So yes, it's very good for digitizing all the signatures and papers. Does it work if people are trying to defraud you? No. One of my colleagues who's the specialist in blockchain, she says, nothing stops you opening the box and putting in sawdust after it's gone. I would say IoT we see a lot. We see a lot of sensor technology helping to know where things are and what our level of inventory is.
I've got one more question here that's come in remotely. George, somebody's asking you about scenario planning. You were talking about how important that is. The question is, how common is it for businesses to be on top of scenario planning in your experience?
It's a good question. I think everybody, when they do their business case, and we sort of refer to this, they do a kind of upside, most likely, and worst case. So they always do that. They always do, well, the upside is we could get another 10%, if people came to us because our lead time was 3 days instead of 33 days. So they always do a bit of that kind of rule of thumb stuff. More complex scenario stuff, though, takes more time and more effort. And somebody mentioned digital twin. We've been looking a lot at digital twins in factories, but we're seeing them now in supply chain. And the digital twin says, actually, just like you have to set up a machine in a factory, you got to, load up a truck, or you got to load up a ship, and you've got to consolidate freight. Well, that's just like the setup. And just like you have a runtime in a factory, I can do 200 units of this in an hour. Yeah, you've got a runtime in supply chain. I can get from here to Birmingham in 2 hours, or I can get across the sea in 4 days. So we're seeing that, and people modeling that and modeling the assets so that they can go, okay, now what would happen if this port was shut? We have to go to another one, now what? So we're seeing people do it. It takes time, though, to build the model of the assets.
And another one from me.
Right.
Just curious to know...
Be gentle with me now.
No, I will be. Is inventory management easier in some sectors than in others? And if so, why?
Yeah, oh, definitely. So if you go back to retail, there are things which, have a definite number. So they call it a GTIN, a global trade identifier. So lots of things, and you heard about the attributes that describe it, the 140 attributes. Sometimes there's lots, head of lettuce, there's 400. But what's more challenging is apparel, because apparel has a size and a colour, and normally it's not in anybody's inventory system. You just have so many packs of dresses. Great, I want to buy a size 14 black one, and I want to pick it up from, let's say, Marks and Spencer's. Did they know? No. They know they've got dresses because they sent packs there, but have they sold size 14 ones? They don't know. They have to send someone to go and hold it for you.
Well, that's all we've got time for from this session. George, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really fascinating. George Lawrie, Forrester.
Thank you very much.